Welcome to Everything Life Coaching. I'm John Kim.
And I'm Noelle Cordeau. We are the founders of Lumia.
And we're super passionate about all things coaching, and we want to share what we've learned from over a decade of coaching and training thousands of life coaches.
Let's dive into the science and magic of coaching. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everything Life Coaching. Today, we have a special guest with us today, Tim Brownson. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. No.
I'm so glad to hear that. And you are the fully booked coach, which is a topic that is important to all coaches. And your website says that you help coaches attract more paying clients with less stress, more fun, and zero bullshit. This speaks to me.
Fantastic.
In so many ways. These are the burning questions that coaches have. How do I do this? So would you be so kind as to orient our listeners to where you are in the world, what your practice is all about, so that we have a good foundation to dive in?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm in England now, in the very southwest tip down in Cornwall. I lived in Florida for 14 years. In fact, I pretty much started my coaching practice in 2006, in February 2006 in Orlando. And now, to begin with, I was a life coach. That's what I trained in back in, originally started 2004, doing some stress management training, then coach training in 2005, and then went full-time 2006 and coached just as a life coach. I say just as a life coach, but as a life coach really struggled exceptionally well. I was a martyr to my cause, sitting by the pool most nights, drinking a beer and reading a self-development book, thinking, well, the clients will soon come, which of course they didn't. You know, I left 20 years of sales thinking, well, if I know sales, then I'll be able to get clients, but obviously marketing's different. So then I had to get my finger out my ass, quite frankly, one day when my wife said to me, you're not still on effing vacation, you know? And I'm like, she does make a good point. I'm kind of treating this because I had 40 years of being cold all the time, and suddenly it's glorious. And this is sit by the pool weather, so which it always is in Orlando. So then I just really dove into marketing a little bit like I did sales many years before, and started to build a business very well. It was getting 1,500 unique visitors a day at one point to the website. I got up to 12,000 people on my newsletter list, and I had a bunch of posts go viral and hundreds of thousands of page views. And then I started to get coaches coming to me and asking me, can you help me do what you did? So it was very, very organic that I got into working with coaches. And that was, 2011, 2012. And then I set up a separate business because my messaging was like, I didn't know what to write about on my blog. So I was writing these blog posts. I was somewhere aimed at coaches and somewhere aimed at just people in self-development that might be interested in life coaching. So that was just blurring the lines and making my positioning a little bit murky. So I set up a separate business, which was called Coach the Life Coach then. In 2013 with a different website, and then ran the businesses parallel for a while, and just basically gradually morphed into just working almost entirely with coaches, just naturally, not really going out looking for the work. And I just loved it because whereas and I know you teach coactive ICF, which is and I love coactive coaching as well, but working with coaches, it allowed me to do both. Yeah. So I could do the coactive element, but then I could flip. And because, if there's something objective that you want to know the answer to, I can, ask clever questions, till I'm blue in the face. But sometimes it's easier. We'll just go and do this, that'll work. And then we don't need to mess around with that. So it allows me to flip back and forth. And my original business, adaringadventure.com, is still going, and I still occasionally work. If anybody goes to the site, I'm looking about 12, 13 years younger than I am now. So I was still clinging on to my 40s when the images were taken for that site. And I still do a little bit. I probably work with 2 or 3 clients a year, usually from referral for for coaching. And now we're back in the UK. We moved back during the pandemic. Great time to move continents. 2 dogs, no house, and the pandemic raging. That's always the best time to move. You pick up any book, it's going to tell you that. So we're back here and we've settled now, and it's good to be back. But I miss the weather, I must say.
Yeah, and I hear that. I mean, laying poolside sounds marvelous. I'm on the East Coast of the US, and I don't have that same experience except for a couple months there. Well, I love your story. I started getting interested in the space of coaching around 2006 as well. And I've really grown up with the space. I started in my 20s, and now I'm in my 40s as a coach trainer, as a coach, kind of looking out into the landscape, and so much has changed about the fields, about the discipline. But I think the spirit of coaching and why people get into the space has remained the same. What was it for you that drew you into the space of coaching itself?
So it would have been around about 1998, 99, and a customer at the time bought me Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins and said, "Hey, I think you'd like this." And that sort of catapulted me into the world of self-development that I didn't know existed. So then I would have been in my late 30s and just stressed all the time, very successful in terms of income and results in the sales industry, but permanently a state of stress, just waiting for Friday so I could start drinking and quote unquote relax over the weekend and take it easy. And I worked in some of the periods was working in advertising as well, which is a very, very driven industry. So I started just listening to more and more books on CDs, just buy every book I could find. And we used to go to the US quite often on vacation. I had a job actually used to take me to the US sometimes. So I'd go and hit the bookstores. I'd been to would have been Barnes and Noble and just buy every self-development CD that I could and just listen to them and really got into it and started to make a difference to my life. And I can't remember, and I've been asked this before, how did you hear about coaching? I can't remember how I found out about it. And I actually mentioned it to a manager of mine at the time. And he said, "You'd be great at that. You'd be a really good coach." And I'm thinking, does he really mean that? Does he just want me to leave? And he's just too kind to say, So I did, and I mentioned before, I did a stress management diploma to work on myself. And that was at Sheffield University in 2004. And I thought, well, I'm going to do some coach training. And just to see just how it goes. It'll make me a better sales manager at the time, and I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. I did it, and I just thought, this is great. And you meet, I think most of the people, I did a load of training then. So I went and did a 15-day NLP practitioner, 2 NLP master practitioners sort of back to back. And you meet so many people that are like you, that you don't, normally my friends would be like rolling their eyes, me wanting to talk about this. And suddenly all these people that want to talk about this, that are just really obsessed with self-development and making changes and helping other people and so on and so forth. And so it was kind of like no looking back. And I knew we were moving to the US and I just thought, I do not want to move to the US and stay in sales. At least in the US, in the UK, I was getting like 5 weeks paid vacation a year. I'd have been lucky if I'd have got a week with it, going to a new country like the US. And I'd already worked for one US sales business, which was a nightmare. Just so driven, target, and just get out and sell. Well, they don't need this. Doesn't matter. Sell it to them anyway, So I just thought, okay, I'm going to do that, and it was great. I love it. I still love coaching. I'm still as passionate about it now as when I started.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things that you said really struck me is the obsession with self-development and change. That is what led me into the space from a really different juxtaposition. I was in my early 20s. I was struggling with eating disorders and depression. I didn't think I was smart. I didn't really feel I was like 20s are supposed to be, in lore, the best times of your life. And I was watching my own kind of implode. And I discovered that there was a field called coaching that was dedicated to helping people move forward and change and grow in a positive way. And I was like, shit, I need this.
Yeah.
And so it led me, straight away in. And I've had a private practice for about 12 years now. Word of mouth only. Folks have just kind of found me. So I'm really interested to talk to you about, taking a marketing approach and what that can do for a coach practitioner. And then as you were sharing, I was thinking about the value that we find at Lumia inside of our coach training program. Because you're so right. When you love this stuff, your friends don't want to talk about it with you.
Right. No, they don't. It's just not again. Please get him out of here now. Yeah.
And so having that community to truly be, validated in your interest, your passion, and your purpose is I think the wellspring that people really need to just, get up and moving with this stuff. So when you got into, working through your practice, you kind of gave us the cliff notes, but if you were to really isolate and say, what were one or two of the most important things that you did or learned in order to take your practice from we are limping along to holy shit, I'm actually able to measure the amount of engagement and traction and really seeing real results building up? What were the most important pieces of awareness for you?
Well, I think I definitely know the first one. And it was, I was very fortunate that somebody said to me, you ought to get into blogging. And this was middle of 2006, I guess. And I was aware of blogging, but I thought it was just, teenagers sat in the bedrooms and what have you. And I started to look into it, and I did set up a blog. And in those days, kids today, they don't know how lucky they've got it with WordPress. I think WordPress was maybe going, but it was just such a pain in the ass to be doing blogging those days. The amount of, it took so long to do everything, And I started doing that and could see almost immediately that I was starting to gain some traction, because there weren't many people. There was quite a close-knit community of bloggers doing self-development, and we all knew each other. So I know some people back then that that went on to be quite big. One of the people that started at the same time as me was Leo Pabiuta, who did Zen Habits, which exploded to 1 million subscribers at one point. And there's others from that era as well. So. But there was nobody doing what I did in terms of with my humor, using a lot of humor. And also I had a tendency to swear a lot in my blog and write about politics and just talk about anything, So I'm always very respectful when I go on somebody else's blog, but anybody who lands on my website, they won't go far down before they hit an F-bomb or what have you. So there was that. And then it was on the back of that, deciding to start a newsletter. Now they're the two hubs of my business, and I think they are for any online business. I'm not against doing paid ads and stuff, but you got to understand that the minute you start paying money to Google or Facebook or whoever it is, then your clients dry up. Whereas with a blog, I got a client the other day. This was about 2 weeks ago. Been on my newsletter for 14 years.
Wow.
And she started with the Down Adventure. She wasn't a coach then. She followed me on that. And then she moved over to Coach Life Coach when I started writing a newsletter there. And then she just contacted me. Now, that's unusual. I do that very often, but it's not unusual for 2 or 3 years. So I think, to me, it was to start to build that list where, with a list, you can demonstrate, you can help people basically, and then you can demonstrate the 3 things, the EAT acronym, which is expertise, authority, which builds trust, So it would be that. It would be blogging and then starting a newsletter on the back of that and driving traffic to my newsletter rather than something I see a lot of coaches doing now, which is almost always a mistake, which is trying to sell people straight onto coaching from your homepage. And people aren't ready to make that kind of investment before they know. We're not an impulse buy. people have to know you, trust you, get familiar with you before they're going to shell out several hundred or several $1,000s.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really interesting point about how to contextualize what an audience is.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of coaches today, when they first start, the concept of an audience almost exclusively lives on social media, because that's probably the most visible example that we have. How many followers you have, how many followers on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. But what you're talking about is building a relationship through content, and then having a more intimate relationship where your messaging is actually going into someone's inbox, which is it. So can you splice out, where we are today? Do you recommend social content for audience building? How do we understand the relationship aspect?
Yeah, I think so. I think social is important, and I think it's a supporting pillar of the overall thing. But the problem you got with social is, so for example, I've got a Facebook group, which is, I only allow coaches and I don't allow any marketers in. It's a safe space for coaches. And there's close on 7,000 coaches in there. Well, probably 6,500 people in that group never see anything that I put in there or other people, because that's the way that Facebook works. Facebook, I've got a Facebook page for the Fully Booked Coach with over 4,000 subscribers. I just don't even bother posting to it anymore. It's just a waste of time, because you're going to look, if you get 0.5% reach, Facebook's throttling that all the time because they want to pay for ads. So what I use social for is more to cross-pollinate. So I'll drive traffic from my newsletter to my Facebook group, to the newsletter, to the website, and just back and forth. So that, because if I send out a newsletter, at least over half the people aren't going to read that newsletter or see it for various reasons. So maybe they'll then see it in the Facebook group if I don't get them there, or maybe, that's really all I bother with now. I use Twitter, but it's mainly to follow marketers whose information I value, and comedy. I use it for, and that's why I very rarely post to Twitter. So Facebook for me is a primary one. But if Facebook just pulled the plug on me, today, it would be a pain in the arse. It would be a big pain, but it would be just like, this is going to create more work for me. If you took my newsletter list off me, it's like, shit, I have really got to scramble now to start generating, because probably 80% plus of my clients are on my newsletter list. Now, they may join as they're thinking of hiring me, but there's still, it's important. And like you say, when you're emailing somebody, and one of the keys to good emails at our level, at B2C, business to consumer, is really making it personal. So people feel like they know you. Most people have a sense that they know me. So I am very who I am in the Facebook group. So I still will talk about politics and do things that you technically shouldn't do. But especially now in an AI world, we've got to, our personal brand is incredibly important. Most coaches don't think it is, or they think they've just got to be like every other coach and just this vanilla. It's like, I'm so happy to be alive, and I drink coffee, and whatever. It's just like, great, but that's not the reason for people to, people want a personality. You've got to be prepared to just like alienate 90% of people, not in a way, not necessarily, you don't have to be a dick about it like I can be sometimes. But you've not got to be scared of thinking, somebody doesn't like me because I've said something that they don't agree with. You cannot operate like that.
Yeah. And I don't think that we can underestimate the role of fear as a blocker for young coaches in creating authentic content. We are in the age of cancel culture. And so, the statement, you've got to alienate 90% of your audience, can be abso-freaking-lutely terrifying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because what happens, the first thing that happens when we get a sense that we've done something wrong is our limbic system fires up, our system fires up and we get like the death feelings,
Mm-hmm.
And so, in order to find your people, you have to really toughen up and get real on the fact that it's actually really great if you piss people off.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because it's impossible to make everybody happy. Just follow anybody, any a list celeb on. I follow a few people on Twitter as much as anything to read the comment thread, and you got these people who hate them, people who love them they can't do any wrong, they can't do any right, and it's just like, obviously it's always somewhere in the middle, but how do they manage that? Well, it's just you get immune to it after a while. Yeah. So for any coach, you've got to. It's that the first person that pushes back. When I used to get unsubscribed from my newsletter going back, into the late noughties and what have you, I'd just be like, I can't believe, why is that person unsubscribed? Especially if I knew them, because in the very early days, I'd know, what have I done? What have I said? And but after a while, you did. And now I'm at the point now where if I don't get any unsubscribes from a newsletter, I go into it and think, okay, what haven't I done here? Because I want to be pushing people all the time. I don't want to. I actually hate upsetting people. I do not like doing it, but I have to push them. It's just because I'm not right for everybody. I cannot work with everybody, and everybody definitely doesn't want to work with me. Because I'm a certain type of personality.
So this often feels like a huge mountain, for folks to climb. And when we were prepping for this, you mentioned the importance of coaches bringing their values into their branding marketing. And to me, that felt like a great starting point to begin to think about how to shape content. Can you explain a little bit about that process? And we can even use me as a case study, because my coaching practice is word of mouth only. So if I were to suddenly take mine using my values, what does this look like? What is this process?
Well, I mean, first of all, most so I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of coaches, and I've taken hundreds of coaches through the process that I developed, which is called the Clarity Method. And most people don't really understand what the values are. They talk about the values and they tend to be very general, but when you actually start to ask them and push them, they don't really know what the values are. So it's probably going to be, do you know, I'm going to ask you now what your values, so what would you say your top 3 values are then?
From a coaching perspective, and from a personal perspective, freedom is one of my top values. And I can even drill down on that. So what I do in my own coaching practice, my background is actually human sexuality. And so I came into the space of coaching from the lens of understanding societal shame and how that imposes these ideas on humans of what they should look like, who they should love, how they should function in the world. And so my value of freedom pertains really specifically to unshackling from expectation. So that's probably my number one. My second value is love, absolute unconditional love. And the way that shows up in the space of coaching for me is truly understanding, a really fundamental precept of coaching, which is that people are whole, capable, and good, and that nobody, wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm going to be an asshole today." I mean, some people do, but for the most part, everybody wakes up and we are these pure souls that life has happened to, life has happened around. We've developed pain, we've developed deficits. So when I come at coaching from a perspective of love, we're getting to that pure essence of potential and humanity. And then I think my third value would be grit. That in my own life and my expectation for my clients is that we do the hard work for the long haul. and that it's going to be ugly crying. It's going to be pain. It's going to be, tumult. And growth itself is actually quite a violent process. So, we're not looking for rainbows and unicorns. We're trying to get to the crack open spot.
So interestingly, you kicked off by saying about your personal values and your business values. You said you think they're the same. They absolutely should for any coach. To me, they should be exactly the same. I think it becomes, it's a little bit different for you because you employ people and it's an organization, whereas me, it's just me. And, my values, my personal values and business values are exactly the same. There's no diversion whatsoever.
So if I'm taking my pillars of love, humor, or love, well, I'm using yours now too, love, and freedom. And I'm saying, all right, I'm going to start creating content and building a personal brand based on these pillars. What do I do? What's step one in this?
Well, I think the step, I wouldn't start with values to build content. I would start with the step one for me, for my clients, will be the client journey. So where do you take your clients? So for me, it would be when I work with a client, the first session is obviously getting to understand their business and what have you. The second session is almost always, what their niche is, and then what the brand is, because there has to be a logical progression. Because you shouldn't be designing your website if you don't know what your niche is, or you don't know what your client avatar is, or you've no idea your messaging and positioning. You shouldn't be writing copy if you don't know those things. There's a progression. So I think for most coaches, it should be thinking out, okay, where you're going to take the order you're going to take your clients. Now, no, it's not a linear process. It's not always going to be like that, but it gives you an idea of what are the areas that I cover off. And then you go back into those to talk about those topics. And that's when you start with the messaging, you start bringing your values in. So for you, it would be, if you're talking about a topic, doesn't matter what the topic is, then bringing in about, talk about stories about how you demonstrated grit and other people can too. Talk about stories, you were saying, before we came on air that you back and forth between Philly and the West Coast and whatever. You could talk about that because there's a freedom element to that you don't want to maybe live over there and you come back and forth, so freedom's important to me. So, we live in the middle of nowhere in Cornwall, and we went and lived in Florida because we wanted to. We came back because we wanted to. So you can mix those things in when you start to tell personal stories, because as coaches, we're in the connection business. People hire us if they connect to us. If nobody hires a coach they don't like. That would be ludicrous. Maybe it's happened. I don't know. There's always exceptions, but as a rule, people don't hire. And we like people who are like us and also are a bit vulnerable to us. So you can have, I talk a lot about, I often say, I'm more like an oil spill than an oil painter. I'm aware I'm in my 60s, I'm old, and, but it's like, this is it. This is who I am, so for you, it's just bringing all that stuff. And I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it happens naturally with you. And in fact, I know. And by the way, I want to say this, if I may, because the reason why we're having this conversation now is because the reason why I contacted Lumia to begin with is because I had I'm not a big fan of ICF training, but I had 3 clients within the space of about 4 months all rave over Lumia and say how caring you were and how much you looked after your. And I said to the last one, Christine Erica, I said, look, I've got to contact these people because I would like to recommend a training company, but there's none that I don't feel are just in it for the money. And so that's why I contacted you originally, and now come to this. I hope I've not embarrassed you by saying
no, I mean, not at all. And I love the VIA character strengths assessment from Positive Psychology. Yeah.
Right.
Unsurprisingly, my top character strength is love. Right. And so, and that is true of every single coach who comes through our door, because if I'm thinking of my other values of grit and freedom, I look at every single soul that's walking through the door of Lumia as like, this is your hopes, your dreams, your destiny, and not only the human themselves, but all of the other humans that they're going to touch, that the responsibility of the
absolutely,
from an ethical perspective to model what love feels like. so that can be generative, I take very seriously. And again, like, and maybe that's one of my values is seriousness, right? I'm like, I am dead fucking serious. Love. Like,
yes, I like it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and okay, so what I think I'm hearing, and this makes a ton of sense, is that your values really need to serve as quality control.
Yes,
for everything that you're doing as a coach, because if you're not, if it's not, and something that I've really recently come to understand and work with in the space of coaching is the cognitive dissonance and pain that takes place when you're operating in a way when your values are overrun. It's a special type of pain, and I've seen it take place probably the most in the way that people experience corporate America, where there's this company and they have these values and they say, this is who we are. And then people get into their jobs and they're like, this feels awful. Or even situations where I've had where my own values have been overrun, but I wasn't able to identify why it was so painful for me.
Right.
And so that's, that's almost emotional security as we're kind of moving through these spaces.
And that is a classic, I call it a value conflict. And I had this, so in one of the jobs, one of my last jobs in sales, I went to work for an American company called ADP, Automatic Data Processing, biggest payroll HR outsourcing company in the world. And just a horrible company to work for. And sales at corporate level, there isn't a fat lot of integrity going on, but then it was just like the company had an integrity bypass operation. It was just ridiculous, some of the stuff that we were asked to do in the name of profit. And that felt really uncomfortable. Now, I knew nothing about values at the time, Noel. So, I didn't know that integrity was super important to me. I just felt uncomfortable. And it's just like this, I'm not happy doing this. In fact, my last 3 jobs in sales were all a little bit, and that's why I job hopped, thinking it's just not this. Not, I'll go to the next one. It's a bit more money and what have you, and that'll sort it out. And no, it's not that. And then now when I look back, I think, it's classic value conflicts. Integrity and freedom are 2 of my top 4 values. I wasn't allowed to couldn't access either of them. So you're never going to square that circle.
No, and so, as we're sitting here and working to set coaches up for success, what advice would you give in terms of noticing that discomfort as you're building your business, and what kind of self-talk needs to go in there around authenticity, values conflict, what happens if people don't like me? How can we be protective for ourselves?
Well, I think in terms of, you're talking about the self-talk, I think, with our values, if I'm a big believer in rapid cognition. So a lot of people called it, gut instinct. And even as little as 20 years ago, it was considered to be fairly woo-woo gut instinct. It's just like, well, who knows what that is? And now we know that there's a mini gut in the stomach. There's an enteric brake system between the brain and the gut that communicates. And I think for the most part, when we're out of alignment with our values and when we know we're doing something wrong, we know it. How many times you ask anybody that's made a big mistake, and the amount of times they will say, I knew I shouldn't have done that. And we do that so frequently, but we override it. So the last job I ever took at sales, I went for the interview. They showed me around the building. I thought, I don't want this job. I hate this job. Everything about it feels wrong. Went into the manager's office or the CEO's office. And he said, we'd love to have you, Tim. And of course, there'll be a £10,000 golden hello, which is about $15,000 or whatever. And suddenly, did I say I didn't want that job? Oh, I do want it because it's £10,000. I literally bought a BMW on the way home. I'm not even joking. Come on, wife, I just bought a BMW. Of course, that way, it disappeared, the novelty of having that about 2 months later, because I didn't listen. I knew it was wrong for me. So I would say to coaches, go with your gut instinct in terms of more if stuff feels wrong than if it feels right. Sometimes we can start to see things. Yeah, I know coaches that have really got burned on spending a lot of money on things that can help them get clients when they get desperate. But if you get that sense that something feels wrong, if you've got that, well, this is too good to be true. It almost certainly is. So it's listening to your gut, basically. It does this. Anybody listening to this who knows me, I think Branson's getting a bit woo-woo now, but it's science, so it's okay to be woo-woo when it's science.
And I mean, this brings us to an excellent point. So, somatics, sensory exploration, in the market research that I've been doing in the wellness space, this is one of the new frontiers, is understanding the messages that come from the body, the soma. Of learning from this last week was that our senses actually compete with each other.
Yeah.
And thinking about how to utilize that for our clients in session. How do we help them? What does it mean when you have tingles? How, as a coach, can you bring that into the space of coaching? How do we use all of the intuitive tools that our body has? These are conversations that weren't happening even 5 years ago.
I was just going to say that. I don't think I'd heard of the word somatics 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I really don't. Now I'm seeing it everywhere. I think this is really interesting.
It is. So, having been in the space of coaching for as long as you have been, where do you see the evolution of the field going? What is your prediction for what coaching is going to be 5 years from now?
Oh, you probably don't want to hear that. I don't. Well, because I was going to say it's AI. It's all going to be robots and machines. No. I don't. I think the industry is. There's going to be I think there already is starting to be almost like a break in the industry of people who take it super professionally and people who treat it more like a hobby. People who are going to really do a deep dive in what it means to be a great coach, but also not just that, the side of it, the marketing side of the business as well. Because at the moment, there's so many coaches out there fighting for relatively so few clients that you've got to be a good coach. You've really got to know marketing as well. So I think it's going to be almost like like you're going to end up with a hobby industry and then more like a professional industry. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think because of AI as well, and that's something, I'm spending about 2 hours a day listening to podcasts on AI and trying to get my head around that. Everybody's up for grabs.
And I agree with you. I wrote a TED talk that was almost accepted about 5 years ago. That was that life coaching is the emotional and economic savior that society didn't know it needed. And when I look at that break in hobby culture and professional culture, I see an expansion of the field, and I see an expansion of the client growth, because what the trends are indicating right now is that the consumer wants purpose, wants meaning, and that industry is starting to see coaching as the missing link between behavioral change and actual behavioral adaptation. And whether we're talking about the space of medicine and health, or we're talking about the space of business where organizations are saying, well, what the hell do we have to do in order to create belonging, inclusion, and so forth? Roles for coaches are being created in that space. And the people who will occupy the professional space of the future are going to be the ones that you're talking about, the ones who are in it to win it as a hardcore professional, versus folks who want to learn something because it's like brain candy.
Right, and that's it. And like I said right at the beginning, that most of the people that I did training with were there really to work on themselves, this is it's a business. It may be a vocation as well. It may be something you desperately want to help people. It's still a business. You cannot get around that, and you have to understand. The coaches that really frustrate me are the ones that come in. And one of the intake questions before I even book a client call or a consult call with somebody is, how many hours a week do you have to spend on building your business? And one of the checkboxes is less than 5 hours. Loads of people put less than 5. How can you build a business? Can you imagine saying, I'm going to start a restaurant. I've only got 5 hours a week to work on building it. But you know what? It'll probably be okay. No, it won't. Because the person who's doing 40 hours is going to be doing 8 times more than you are, all things being equal.
A musical reference that you may or may not be familiar with, but I relate to very much, is the quote, "I have my mind on my money and my money on my mind." As a business owner, coaching practice and a company, it doesn't turn off. Thinking about my business, thinking about our students, thinking about my clients.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if I'm brushing my teeth or walking my dog, or it is very much like oxygen that surrounds
100%. Yeah, I wake up thinking about it every morning, literally. Literally. Yeah.
What I have been thinking about, and the reason that we've built Lumia to be such a loving, positive institution, is if it is true that as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a coach, it is going to be consuming, well, let's freaking have fun. Let's have love. Let's have joy. Let's laugh. Let's live. Let's orient our values, because it is consuming. And I feel that if I'm going to be consumed by something, this is a pretty great slice of humanity to be engaging in. What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out in 2023? Because we are living through some weird times.
Just a little bit, yeah.
So what advice would you give to folks who are looking out into the landscape of society and saying, I want to be a coach?
Well, I'm going to guess that there's, you touched on something. I'm not sure if it's right at the beginning, Noel, before we started recording, that coaches are there to help people. There's and I've heard so many people say, the coaches, they're just in it for the money. I almost never meet a coach like that. There are some, and we know some of the people that are successful there, but they're very, very few and far between. Most coaches do it because they really want to help people. So I'm going to presume anybody listening to this, really, that's a given. So if you don't want to help people, don't do it. Go and flip burgers or something. I have no idea, But if you really want to do it, then you've got to put the same amount of effort into building your business, into your marketing, into understanding marketing, as you have understanding coaching and being the best coach. So I spent the first 3 years of my coaching career just doing more and more coach training, thinking, that'll do it. That's the last one. Yeah, I literally had about 12 certificates on the wall behind me. It's just look at the certificates, but I had nobody to show them because I hadn't any clients, because nobody can see the certificates, from the other end of the internet or what have you. So it's really understanding and being prepared and having the time as well. So it's not one piece of it. Don't do it if you've only got 5 hours a week. You can't, because you can't compete with the person that's got 40 hours a week. It's just, how can you possibly do that?
I think that's a great expectation set of the different pieces that have to be moved into place, and the fear barrier that has to be overcome. I've seen the same thing as you, and I experienced the same thing as you, of getting more and more and more education. I even plowed myself into a PhD because I really wanted to understand, the human behavior. And hilariously and ironically, the marketing piece was what held me up. The reason that we have Lumia today was because I was so scared of putting out my own shingle and standing on the work that I do as a coach that it was actually easier for me to build a huge company.
Right, yeah. That is ironic, isn't it? Yeah.
And so that it's such an interesting juxtaposition of the personal and the public and the education and the craft and the mindset that goes into it. So.
And by the way, you said something interesting there about you wanted to do the PhD because you wanted to learn about the human condition. I think there's a big difference between learning. I'm a voracious learner. I mean, like I said, I listen to about 2 hours of podcasts every day. I'm out for my dogs an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. And, I think that's one thing. But it's the doing it. Do it because you want to and because you want the knowledge and you love learning. But don't think that that's the thing that's going to separate you from the competition, because it isn't. Coaches or clients are going to hire the coach they like and the coach who can sort of demonstrate their value, not the one with the most training. Nobody ever asked, in all my times as a coach, I think I got asked like a handful of times, what certifications I got. Just nobody cares about that. They just want something they like.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the piece from a confidence perspective that folks will wrestle with the most is, am I likable? Who are my people? And to that end, I would say to the young coach, turn the mirror on yourself, because you like people. You're in this because you want to help people. You care about people. That is going to be apparent in what you're putting out into the world, and it's valuable.
It is, and everybody's likable to certain people.
I agree.
You've just got to be, and that it comes back to what I was saying before. You may not be like, other people. There may be loads of people that don't like you. That's fine, because you can only deal with a few clients at once anyway. Focus on the people that get you and like you, that are in your tribe, and just talk to those people. Stop trying to appeal to everybody and get everybody to like you, because they won't. Simple as that.
Yeah. And I think the key thing you said there is talk to people. That you can't do this work unless you're talking to people. No,
absolutely not. No, somebody said to me the other day, if you had to start your business, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, if you had to start your business from scratch now, what would you do? You've got no website, you've got no newsletter, you've got nothing, no social media. I'd like this. I'd pick this up. I'd call everybody I know. I'd say, who do you know that could benefit from what I do? And I'll tell you something now, I know I could get clients in the first week to get me relative. And that's not because I'm a brilliant salesperson. That's because I'm prepared to ask people. And so many coaches, talking about my Facebook group, so I put a welcome message in there today saying to the dozen people or so that joined this week, saying, ask questions. If you want my help, tag me. I will answer every question I get asked. I will help anybody that asks for my help. And I guarantee you now, none of them will. Well, maybe one, but out the group, I probably get tagged once a week. And I would kill to have me, or would have done 15 years ago, a group like mine where I can go and pick my brains for free.
Last question for you, Tim. Yes. This has been a wonderful conversation. If folks want to ask questions of you, where can they find you?
They can find me at thefullybookedcoach.com, or they can come and join my Facebook group, which is called The Fully Booked Coach. So it's facebook.com/groups, The Fully Booked Coach. And and they can test it out.
Tim, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation today. And, so many of our listeners use this podcast as a companion as they're going through coach training. So we hope that they will come find you when they are ready to get into the business of marketing and branding and sourcing those clients. I hope you have a great day, and everyone.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. It's been great. Thanks, Noel.
Oh, indeed. We'll have to figure out a visit at some point. And we will catch you all next time.
Thanks for listening to Everything Life Coaching. If you're feeling the draw to become a coach, head to lumiacoaching.com/everything. Explore a new career that brings fulfillment, gives you a true sense of purpose, and a bold community to do it with.
Lumia is ready to equip you with the tools, training, and community you will need to reach your goals. If you're ready to build a unique coaching business on your own terms while making an impact on the world at large, Lumia is the next bold step in your coaching journey. That's lumiacoaching.com/everything.
And hey, if you're waiting for a sign, this is it.